Hey guys, tonight we step onto a muddy lane in a medieval village, kind where the air smells faintly of wood smoke, damp hay, and something you can't quite place, probably because you don't really want to. The ground beneath your boots squelches slightly, and you make a mental note that your shoes will never be the same again. Candles flicker in narrow windows, their glow spilling over warped wooden shutters. While the last traces of daylight fade into a deep blue haze overhead, you probably won't survive this place for long between questionable water, non-existent plumbing, and the casual acceptance of mystery meats and pies. The odds aren't in your favor. But for now, you're here, breathing in the smoke-laced evening air. The lane stretches before you like an invitation you didn't. Yeah, exactly. RSVP 2. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And I'd love to know where you're watching from. Drop your location and the local time down in the comments. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. You follow the lane, careful to avoid the deeper ruts. The ones half filled with brackish water that reflects both the moon and the occasional drifting feather. Somewhere nearby, a dog barks, quickly shushed by its owner, and the sound is swallowed by the quiet hum of village life winding down. That's when you notice them cats. Not one or two, but at least a dozen, each appearing and disappearing between doorways. Low stone walls and stacks of firewood. They move like they own the place, tails twitching in rhythm with their measured steps. A black cat pauses under a swinging lantern outside the cooper's workshop, its green eyes glinting as if it knows something you don't. Another mottled, with russet and cream, hops onto a barrel and grooms itself with slow, deliberate strokes. You have the distinct feeling that every single one of them has clocked your presence and filed you away under visitor. Possibly edible if things go wrong. The villagers don't seem to mind, or rather, they don't appear to acknowledge the cats directly. But you can't shake the sense that these sleek, silent creatures aren't just here for the scraps. Somewhere deep in the folds of medieval belief, cats are more than mousers. They are watchers, interpreters, perhaps even messengers. In the same way the creak of the windmill might predict a storm, cat's sudden departure from a warm hearth might whisper of danger. Historians still argue whether this suspicion came from the church's official stance, or from a patchwork quilt of folklore sewn together over centuries. Some say it was Pope Gregory IX himself, who, in the 13th century, linked black cats to the devil's work, planting the seed that would grow into widespread mistrust. Others insist that the association had been prowling the edges of human imagination long before that, fed by pagan rituals where cats were revered, feared, or both. As you walk, a tabby with a torn ear follows you for several paces, staying just out of reach. You slow down, curious, and it stops too, blinking at you in that unblinking way cats somehow manage. It's the look of a creature that has already judged you and found you interesting, enough to keep tabs on but not worth touching. The lane narrows as it snakes between two rows of timber-framed houses, their upper stories leaning toward each other like gossiping neighbors. Here the candlelight seems warmer, pooling in little golden puddles on the ground. You catch a faint mewl from somewhere above, and when you tilt your head, you see a cat perched on a thatched roof, silhouetted against the rising moon. It's still, utterly still, as if carved from shadow, but you're certain it's watching. Whether it's watching you or something behind you is another matter entirely. There's a strange comfort in their presence, even if the villagers might tell you otherwise. Cats, after all, are excellent at slipping between the worlds of the known and the unknown. They walk the fence between superstition and necessity, between being your loyal pest control and the witch's silent informant. And as you pass another doorway where a pair of golden eyes gleam from the shadows, you can't help but feel you've stepped into their territory more than the villagers. A sudden wind stirs the thatch above you, carrying with it the smell of baking bread from somewhere close by. It's warm and yeasty, a welcome contrast to the sharp tang of the evening's chill. One of the cats leaps from a low wall to a doorstep, and the door opens just wide enough for it to slip inside before slamming shut again. You're left standing in the lane, the echo of the latch still ringing in your ears. Wondering if you've just witnessed an ordinary pet coming home or a spy reporting in, you shake your head, trying not to grin. In this village, the difference might just depend on who you ask and how much they've had to drink. The moon climbs higher, the shadows stretch longer, and the cats remain silent. Patient and always watching. Asterisk, you keep walking, your boots pressing softly into the packed earth as the lane curves toward the village green. It's not much of a green this time of year, more brown than anything, with stubborn tufts of grass fighting for survival among the muddy ruts carved by carts and livestock. A low wooden fence circles the space, broken in places where the rails have been used as kindling or simply rotted away. On one side stands a weather-beaten stocks, leaning slightly as though embarrassed to still be here, but it's the far side of the green that catches your eye. A small gathering of villagers, huddled together in the deepening dusk. You can hear the low murmur of their voices before you make out what they're looking at. There's an old woman seated on a rough stool, her shawl pulled tight around her shoulders, and in her lap sits the largest black cat you've ever seen. Animal is perfectly still, its body curled, but its head upright, eyes locked on something in the distance. The woman strokes it absently, her fingers moving with the rhythm of someone who has done this 1,000 times before. Every now and then, she says something quietly, and the people around her nod, as though receiving important news. You hang back, because there's a certain kind of energy here, the kind that tells you you're better off as an observer than a participant. It's not fear exactly, more like that feeling when you walk into a room mid-conversation and realize the topic is both none of your business and entirely about you. Historians still argue whether gatherings like this were formal rituals or just part of the evening's entertainment in rural life. Was the cat truly believed to be whispering secrets into the old woman's ear? Or was she simply a good storyteller with a flair for the dramatic? Some written accounts suggest that cats were thought to have a familiar spirit, capable of carrying messages between the physical and spiritual worlds. Others suggest this was just a polite way of saying the cat was very good at catching rats. The old woman suddenly lifts the cat into the air, holding it so that it faces the small crowd. The animal doesn't squirm or hiss, it just stares, unblinking. In that way, cats do when they're deciding whether or not to judge you. One of the men in the group laughs nervously and scratches the back of his neck. A few of the others glance toward the ground, willing to meet those yellow-green eyes. You realize there's a strange performance unfolding, part superstition, part theater, and maybe part neighborhood gossip. The woman lowers the cat again, mutters something you can't hear, and then lets it leap from her lap. It lands with the kind of soft, silent grace that makes you wonder if it's even touching the earth at all, then pads away toward the shadows of a nearby barn. The gathering breaks apart as if the spell has been dismissed. The air feels cooler now, the last blush of sunset giving way to a deep violet sky. Lanterns are being lit in windows, the warm glow spilling out onto the muddy ground. Somewhere nearby, a man is chopping wood, the thud of his axe steady and sure. But the image of that black cat lingers in your mind. The way it seemed to command attention without making a sound, you remember hearing once. Though you can't recall where that in some parts of Europe, owning a cat during certain times in history could be enough to get you accused of witchcraft. And yet, in the same breath, these animals were kept for their practical value. It's the kind of contradiction that makes perfect sense here, where survival often depends on both faith and pragmatism. As you make your way past the green, you glance toward the barn where the cat disappeared. A sliver of moonlight catches on a pair of eyes inside, watching you steadily. Then they blink once, slowly, and vanish into the darkness. You keep walking, but your shoulders tighten just a little. In a village like this, you're never entirely sure whether the cats belong to the people or if the people belong to the cats. You follow the narrow lane as it threads between thatched cottages, their low roofs hunkered down like sleeping animals against the creeping chill. The smell of wood smoke grows stronger, mingling with the faint, damp scent of straw and manure. From nearby pens, somewhere behind you, a door slams, followed by the brief yowl of a cat, whether startled or annoyed. It's impossible to tell. Ahead, the road widens into a cluster of cottages so close together they might have been built from the same handful of timber. You pass one with a window propped open by a stick, and through it you catch sight of a cat perched on the sill. This one is mottled gray and white, its fur puffed against the cold. It's not looking at you, though it's staring intently across the road toward another cottage, as if keeping watch. It's the sort of behavior that once would have been noted and whispered about over tankards of ale. See that cat? Someone might say. It's been sitting there for 3 nights straight, never blinking. Bet it's watching for her. And her in these conversations was almost always some woman the speaker was half afraid of and half intrigued by, usually a midwife, a healer, or someone with a suspiciously high success rate in curing ailments the village priest couldn't. Historians still argue whether these suspicions began with actual incidents or if they were simply byproducts of fear and boredom in small communities. Was it the occasional unexplainable illness, or the way cats seemed to appear and vanish without warning that linked them to darker forces? Or did the cats just happen to keep company with people already marked as other? You stop near a cart piled with sacks of grain, its wheels crusted with mud. The grain merchant, a stout man with a russet wool cap pulled low over his ears, is talking to a younger fellow. You can only catch snippets. Saw her by the river at dawn. Black cat right at her heels. The younger man glances over his shoulder, lowers his voice. They both laugh, but it's the kind of laugh people use when they're not entirely sure they want to be overheard. You keep walking, passing a small side alley where the shadows seem to have pooled thicker than elsewhere, and there just inside the gloom you see another cat. This one is jet black, its fur almost absorbing what little light remains. Its eyes glint like 2 small coins in the dark. For a moment you think it's going to dart away, but instead it stays put, tail curling slowly back and forth. A cold breeze works its way down the alley, carrying with it the smell of damp stone. The cat's gaze follows you as you move past, and you can't shake the feeling that it's silently taking note of something, maybe where you're going, or maybe whether you're worth telling anyone about. You imagine it's slipping away later, padding across rooftops to deliver a silent report to someone waiting in a candlelit room. Not that you believe it, of course. But here, with the wind pressing at your back and the night thickening around you, belief feels strangely negotiable. After all, there's a reason sailors once refused to harm ships' cats, thinking them good luck, or that fishermen's wives in some coastal villages wouldn't let a cat out of the house on the day their husbands went to sea, fearing it might bring storms. You pass a cottage where someone has set out a small bowl of milk near the step. A ginger cat is lapping at it, pausing now and then to glance toward the door, as if expecting payment for its trouble. Perhaps it's there to keep the mice from getting at the winter stores, or perhaps it's just part of a quiet agreement. Between villager and feline, I feed you. You keep the secrets you overhear. The lane bends again, leading you toward the faint hum of voices and the golden haze of light spilling from an open doorway ahead. Somewhere nearby, you catch the sound of soft footfalls on a roof, then the faintest thud as something leaps down into the dark. You don't see the cat, but you absolutely know that it's there. And just like that, the village feels smaller, as though you've wandered into a living map of watchful eyes, most of them belonging to creatures who never ask for your trust, yet somehow demand it all the same. Asterisk, the lane turns darker where the cottages give up trying to share their candlelight, and you realize the village has another shift of workers, the ones whose tools are a staff, a rattle, and a voice that knows how to fold itself into night. The watchman finds you before you find him, stepping from a doorway like a shadow that's learned manners. He carries a horn-paneled lanthorn whose light is the color of weak tea, and a short cudgel that looks more like a walking stick than a threat. Rounds, he says quietly, as if the word itself might wake the children. Then tips the lanthorn so you can walk inside its little pocket of gold. You fall in beside him, and the two of you set off along a path that feels new even, though you walked it an hour ago. The night has remade everything. The same barrels are now obstacles. The same puddles glimmer like coins you'd rather not pick up. The watchman shakes his wooden clapper once to crisp knocks that sound like knuckles on a church door end. calls the hour in a low sing-song, the way his father taught him, past 8 of the clock, and all's well. The tune is matter of fact, not dramatic. But you feel the lane settle as if someone smoothed its blankets. Mainstream fact slips into place like a latch. In many medieval towns, the night watch patrolled streets with lanterns and rattles, announcing the hours, checking doors, and minding curfew fires. Ordinances often required householders to cover their lights and keep streets passable by moving carts and sweepings out of the way. The watchman's voice is part lullaby, part reminder that the village is still a village, even when the shutters are shut. You haven't gone 20 paces before the first cat materializes black as wet slate, stepping from beneath a cart to match your speed with insulting ease. The watchman notices too. "There you are, Mistress Knight," he mutters, as if greeting a colleague. Ticket keeps parallel, tail held like an exclamation point. The ink forgot to dry. "They walk the boundary," he adds. "We mind doors. They mind the in-betweens." He means the alleys, the eaves, seams between roof and star. The clapper clicks again at a corner where an alley hunkers like a folded cloak. The watchman raises his lanthorn, and you see them, 2 pairs of eyes. Low and level, set in cats whose colors the night refuses to disclose. They don't bolt, they register you, then register the watchman, and then the alley itself fits sacks. It's broken pale, the mouse tracks etched filigree in the dust. "They know who belongs," he murmurs. You feel oddly flattered to be tentatively included. A door opens a crack, spilling a wedge of bread-smelling light, and a woman in a linen cap peers out. She presses a scrap into the watchman's palm crust and cheese, a thank you that arrives warm, breaks the crust, offers you a piece, crumbles the rest for a cat you can't see, but both of you pretend is listening. "Quirky tidbit," the watchman confides with a guiltless shrug. Some nights he drops a line of crumbs by suspect doors to see which cats gather. "If they favor a threshold," he says, "folks swear the house is up to odd business. I swear it means their cook is generous. Either way, by morning there will be talk, and talk is the night's second lantern." Joke 1. You resolve to keep your own threshold crumb-free, unless you want a performance review from the Feline Guild. At the square, the stocks lean in their usual shame, and the well sits quiet, except for the occasional plink of water remembering itself. The watchman taps the wellhead with his cudgel, a polite hello to anything listening from below. A cat appears on the well's rim, as if conjured by manners, then circles and sits, watching the bucket rope like a stage curtain between acts. They wait, the watchman observes, for what changes rope, light, wind. You nod, thinking that cats look for stories where humans look for answers. He steers you down a thinner vein of alley where the cottage's shoulders nearly touch. Here the roofs knuckle together and leave a crawl space that whispers when the wind finds it. Somewhere above, soft footfalls patter, skitter, stop. You pause, and the watchman raises the lanthorn, showing a tabby threaded along the beam-like embroidery. It glances down, blinks once in, unhurried semaphore, and resumes its patrol. "Keeps the rats shy," he says. And the boys too, when they're planning vinegar pranks. Another mainstream truth, immovably practical: cats are deterrents. With whiskers, villages store grain. Grain stores mice. Mice store trouble. A cat is the lock you feed. Historians still argue whether the Night Watch truly believed cats spied for witches, or whether they repeated the suspicion because repeating it kept people indoors and careful. The watchman shrugs when you ask, a gesture that carries a century of footnotes. Belief and usefulness often share a bed, and who is to say which one snores? He remembers a priest from years ago who railed from the pulpit about the devils. Midnight eyes, and also remembers the same priest thanking the tavern mouser by sneaking him a sausage. You picture the sermon and the sausage passing each other on the lane like two ships exchanging. Lantern signals. You pass the smithy, black as a closed fist, and stop to test the door. Sound wood, good latch. A cattail slips under the gap where ash drifts out like old smoke, learning to walk. He lives there, the watchman says. Keeps the coal mice nervous. Imagine a mouse with a tiny helmet, then amend the image. In this economy, even helmets are luxury goods. Joke 2. You briefly consider forming a union of overworked village metaphors and electing the cat as treasurer. Asterisk. Farther on, a shutter rattles, and both of you turn habit, not fear. The lanthorn shows a ginger cat perched like a gargoyle, ears angling at a frequency you can't hear. Below, the alley opens onto a little court where a carpenter's offcuts lie piled like a sermon on kindling. The watchman nudges a plank aside with his boot. Inside the hollow, 3 kittens blink awake, tiny bellies rising and falling like moth wings. Their mother appears from absolutely nowhere and gives the watchman a withering look that transcends species and profession. He bows to the air above them. "Forgive me, madame," he says. "I'm counting citizens." You ask him, softly, whether anyone actually watches the cats the way he does people. He smiles at the irony. More than you think. He tells you about a widow who swears she can tell which houses keep their hearth lawfully by which cats choose there. Step. He mentions a baker who claims a cat crossing left to right at dawn means sell the smaller loaves first. He admits he himself has a rule. If a cat won't pass a certain alley, he'll walk the long way, because cats don't waste steps. Their maps are older, he says. You try the thought on and discover it fits. At the outer gate, a wooden mouth the village closes at night to lean on the rail while the watchman checks the pin. Beyond lies the open dark, fields folded like sleeping dogs. A cat slips through the rails, brushes your boot, and disappears toward the hedgerow where stars have fallen and decided to twinkle as beetles instead. The watchman marks it with his eyes. That one knows the mill road, he says, as if cats keep their own patrol routes on charts you'll never see. He calls the hour again, past 10 of the clock. And all's well, and for a moment, the village answers. A cough here, latch there, the mouse-soft scurry of someone late to their bed. Your own eyelids feel pleasantly heavy, the kind of weight that isn't worried but wool. It occurs to you that the cat you met in the alley at dusk might already have visited 3 roofs, a granary loft, and an unguarded bowl of cream, and also may have delivered a full report to the night itself, which likes to be kept up to date. Joke 3. You consider sending the night a follow-up letter thanking it for the excellent turn-down service. On the way back, the watchman shows you a chalk mark he leaves on doorstones when a shutter bangs to freely, a tiny X like a kiss. Nobody wants. The morning, the carpenter knows where to tighten hinges. Sometimes he adds, someone draws a second X in return beside a threshold where cats refuse to sit. A quiet neighborhood note that the house needs a blessing, or at least a new broom. Whether those marks chase away anything spiritual, he won't swear. But he will swear the chalk makes people kinder to their doors, which, in a village of wind and weather, is a respectable miracle. By the time you part at the square, the cats have thinned back into their usual ration of shadows, and the lanthorn's tea-colored light looks almost enough to drink. You thank the watchman, who taps his clapper once, a good night on wooden lips. As you step away, something weightless rubs your calf soft, certain and gone. You look down at empty air and smile, because of course the night would sign its name. That way, the lane ahead bends toward the green, where the village seems to keep its gossip in a looser jar. This is where the market sets up when the weather cooperates rough. Trestles for fish, baskets for eggs, bolts of linen that flap in the wind like they're trying to escape domestic service. But at this hour, the square is a spill of moonlight. On cobblestone, the stalls folded down into sleeping shapes. You hear a single yonurzen, then the soft clink of something small striking stone. Following the sound, you find an old man kneeling near the well. His beard is more silver than frost, and his knees pop like twigs as he shifts. Da-da-da. Glow of a tallow dip shielded in a horn lantern. He's setting out a saucer of milk, as casual as a baker putting out rolls to cool. He glances up, nods once, and goes back to pouring. The milk is thick and white, a rare treat, and within seconds 2 shadows detach themselves from the darker gray-striped cat and a smaller one, all ears and suspicion. The old man doesn't coax them, doesn't look directly at them, just murmurs. Something about the weather. If the moon sits on its back, there'll be rain, he says. And whether that's for you or for them, you can't tell. Mainstream fact drops neatly into your pocket in many medieval communities. Feeding the cats of the square wasn't simple kindness. It was part of pest control and considered a public good. Without them, grain stores could vanish to rats in a season. The bigger cat laps with steady purpose, the little one flicking its tongue in fits, eyes darting like a scribe trying to keep up with dictation. The man gestures with his chin toward the churchyard. They watch there too, he says, and you follow his gaze. Sure enough, a pale shape moves along the low wall, another cat, its fur catching the moon until it looks dipped in quicksilver. Keeps the spirits in their own beds, he adds without smiling. Quirky tidbit. Some villagers swore cats could sense restless souls, curling themselves along graves like living latches. Whether it was superstition or just the appeal of sunworms stoned by day, no one pressed for proof. Joke 1. You picture a cat union with the motto guarding grain and ghosts since the year dot. You sit on the well's rim, careful not to startle the drinkers. From here you can see the parish notice, board flapping parchment with ink that's run in the rain. One corner announces the next Saint's Day feast. Another warns of a black hen gone missing, possibly bewitched. The old man mutters that people will blame witches for anything, even hens with wanderlust. Historians still argue whether such notices were genuine belief or just colorful cover stories for theft. But either way, the cats will keep their own registry and scent. In memory, a distant clatter breaks, the dropped bucket maybe, or a stubborn door. The gray-striped cat freezes, ears swiveling, then abandons the saucer and trots toward the sound. The little one hesitates, glances at you, and pads after it, tail stiff with importance. You feel oddly entrusted with the empty saucer, like you've been deputized. The old man takes it back with a grunt. They'll find it, he says. You ask what it is, but he's already walking away, lantern bobbing like a tired firefly. You decide to follow the cats instead. They lead you down a side path, one that smells of damp rope and crushed mint. Here the cottages crouch low, their thatch shaggy against the sky. Shutter bangs once, then twice in the lazy rhythm of something left unlatched. The cats slip beneath the sill. You hear a woman's voice, half scold, half laughing. Then the shutter is drawn tight. When the cats emerge, one carries a small scrap of bread in its teeth, which it drops at your feet before vanishing. You're not sure if it's tribute or insult. Joke 2. You decide it's a medieval Yelp review, 1 star. Bread was stale. The path spits you back into the main square, where the church looms at one end like a tall uncle at a family gathering. Its doors are shut, but a votive glows faintly through a crack, the flame guttering with the draft. On the steps, a black cat sits perfectly still, head tilted toward the bell tower. Somewhere inside, mice must be rehearsing their own midnight mass. You take a seat beside it, because why not? The stone is cold, but the air smells faintly of beeswax and lavender, the way churches always do when they've been recently scrubbed for a feast day. You remember something you once heard. Priests warning that cats could slip between worlds, carrying whispers from the living to the dead and back again. The black cat blinks slowly at you, and you can't decide whether it's dismissing the idea or confirming it. Some say they're spies, you murmur, but maybe they're just messengers. Cat looks away, clearly bored with your philosophizing. And you laugh quietly so as not to wake the graves. From the far side of the square comes a new figure bent, shawled, carrying a bundle that might be herbs or laundry. She moves deliberately, leaning on a stick, and pauses to glance at the black cat. It rises, stretches, and follows her without a sound, vanishing into the lane as though it were never there. You sit a while longer, watching the moon shift behind. The steeple, by the time you rise, the square feels smaller, the shadows friendlier. The saucer of milk has been licked clean. The notice board flaps in the gentlest of breezes, and somewhere, in the stitched-together fabric of alleys and eaves, cats are filing their invisible reports. You walk on, and the sound of your own footsteps feels like part of the village's night song. Joke 3. You briefly consider leaving a saucer of milk out for the moon just to see who turns up. By morning, the village remembers how to be loud. The green yawns awake into market day, and everything that can clatter, clinks. Carts line up like patient beetles, their wheels bandaged with rope to save the rims. Trestles unfold. Canvas awnings tug against poles. Someone tests a bell once, twice, until it rings in a key even the pigeons approve. The air tastes like apples knocked into cider, onions daring you to weep, and smoke that has decided to be friendly. Cats are already here, of course threading, ankles, claiming sun patches, diagnosing which stalls mean leftovers. You drift among the early crowds. A woman in a teal kirtle counting eggs into a wicker basket. A boy with a broom erasing yesterday's mud like it said something rude. Fiddler warming his fingers over a cup and extracting notes that smell faintly of cinnamon. The cats move through it all as if the market were arranged for their convenience. A marmalade Tom hops onto a fishmonger's plank and is shooed with theatrically large gestures. He leaves but not far, sitting precisely 2 fish lengths away, which seems to satisfy some unwritten law of fairness. Rumor arrives sooner than bread. It always does. Today's begins at the vegetable stall, where 2 neighbors weigh cabbages. Like moral choices and talk and voices, trimmed to the exact volume of public-private. She went by the river again, one says. At dawn, the other nods, solemn, and the black cat, as always, the first finishes, with the gravity of someone who has solved a sum. The tail slinks outward, gathering garnish. As it goes, the cat leaped onto a boundary stone. The cat stared into the water, and the water stared back. The cat sneezed, and a trout presented itself on the bank like an offering. By the time it reaches the bread stall, it includes a star that winked twice. Mainstream fact: medieval markets were not only for goods, but for news gossip, proclamations, and the soft currencies of omen and advice. Market peace laws tried to keep tempers civil. Notice boards flapped with bylaws, feast days, and the odd warning about false weights. But no ordinance could cork rumor, and witchcraft talk traveled best along the braid of fear and entertainment. Cats, with their tidy talent for being in the wrong place at the right time, rode those whispers like sleek firming. At the far end of the green stall has drawn a small constellation of onlookers. The sign above it, a slat of wood painted, with a hastily sincere star, says, "Charms honest and witch-proof." Behind the table stands a merchant with the smile of a man who has never met a doorstep he couldn't upsell. On his cloth are neat rows of objects, all very touchable and none quite admitting what they do. You let yourself be pulled closer, the way one drifts toward a fire without meaning to. "What troubles can we untrouble?" he asks the first customer, a shepherd in a russet cloak smelling faintly of wet wool and philosophy. The merchant produces a string of red thread, threaded with rowan berries bright, cheerful like punctuation with opinions. "Tie this round a lamb's neck," he says, "and no ill I will fasten." The shepherd squints, bargains the price down by a third, and pays with a kind of reluctant hope that could launch an entire theology for a housewife with flour on her sleeve. The merchant lifts a small bundle of salt wrapped in linen. "A pinch in each corner of the hearth," he instructs. Witches don't care for tidy thresholds. For a cooper's apprentice, we suggest an iron key to hang above the door. Iron displeases wandering spirits, he claims, and also keeps the wind from remembering it can come in uninvited. On the corner of the table, a shallow bowl holds hagstones, pebbles with natural holes drilled by water and patience. "Look through and see the truth of a thing," he promises, passing one to a child who immediately peeks at his own nose and looks impressed. "Quirky," tidbit the merchant offers with a flourish. A tiny bell meant for a cat's collar, so the creature cannot be conscripted to stealth. He leans in conspiratorially. "Witches prefer a silent messenger. You imagine fitting a bell on last night's alley sovereign and have to bite your smile into the shape of politeness? Joke 1. You picture the cat writing a strongly worded letter to management about hostile work environments and unacceptable accessories. Historians still argue whether sellers like this were charlatans cashing in on fear or the practical arm of a shared belief system, neighbors exchanging comfort you could hold. Perhaps both. The same hand that buys a hagstone will hang a horseshoe, carve a daisy wheel into a barn beam. and chalk a blessing over a lintel on 12th night. In a world brimming with drafts, you try a lot of doors. Some open, some just make you feel less alone. A woman in a blue wimple steps forward. "Coins ready?" she asks in a low voice about the breath. You've heard the rumor before that cats will creep onto a sleeping baby's chest and steal the breath. The merchant shakes his head with practiced sorrow and reaches for a sprig of rosemary tied with thread. "Hang this above the cradle," he says, "for sweetness of air and mother's ease." He doesn't correct the superstition outright, but he gentles it toward herbs and a lullaby. Mainstream reality peeks through. Small rooms, smoky air, and winter-shut windows make any breath a precious thing. Cat, seeking warmth, will go where the warmth is. Fear translates that to malice, especially on market day when stories buy attention faster than onions. You pick up one of the hold stones and hold it to your eye. Through the fossil circle, the world looks almost persuaded. It softens stall keepers. Saintly. A tabby nose appears in the hole for an investigative sniff. He sneezes delicately into your worldview, then curls on the merchant's ledger as if auditing his accounts. The merchant pretends not to notice the new furry paperweight. Proof, he whispers to the surrounding crowd, that cats do not dislike me. This earns a few approving nods, because anyone tolerated by cats enjoys a certain diplomatic immunity. Joke 2. You consider hiring the cat as your personal publicist. Rates likely negotiable in fish. From the fishmonger, a woman calls across, "What for a hen that won't lay?" Without missing a beat, the merchant offers a charm against knotted luck, a tiny plate of straw to hang in the coop. A boy whispers that his aunt swears by crossing brooms over doorways. An old man counters with chalk the sign of the cross on the cat's head, which the assembled cats ignore by chewing on a reed. The market assembles its own pharmacopoeia, half superstition, half social glue. If the cures fail, at least the story will ripen. A priest ambles by, sleeves pinched to avoid onion skins, and pauses at the stall. He says nothing, only eyes the spread with a look that could curdle cream and maybe even certain cheeses. Merchant bows low. "For peace of minds, father." The priest smooths his beard and chooses a hold stone. "For drafts in the sacristy," he murmurs, and walks on. You file that under universal human behavior. One can disapprove and still prefer fewer drafts. Across the way, two youths tease a black cat with a twig. The fisherwoman from the river snaps, "Leave off," with a voice that could frighten fog. He keeps rats from the nets. They slink away, their courage suddenly in need of lunch. The cat gives them a look that promises to remember their faces for a century and returns to supervising eels. Mainstream fact again. Working cats were as common as working dogs, brewery mousers, granary guardians, shipboard luck. People may have called them spies, but their wages were paid in saved grain and ungnawed cords. The rumor you met in the morning makes a second circuit, now embellished with a detail about a candle that refused to go out, which everyone agrees is either surely witchcraft or surely a draft. Historians still argue whether communities believed particular cats belonged to particular witches, or whether the familiar was a more fluid idea, sometimes a spirit in animal form, sometimes just an animal near a person already suspected. The debate rarely matters to rumor, which values narrative over nuance. As the sun tilts, the market adds music to its breath. A drummer finds a beat. The fiddler, now thawed, braids it with a tune that makes even turnips look optimistic. Charmseller pockets his coins and hands the tabby a shred of dried fish with the air of an employer closing payroll. The cat sniffs, accepts, and immediately files the transaction under "might work again." You pass the stall one more time, and the merchant tries you with a modest packet of salt. "For your doorstep," he says, "so cats report only good news." You take it? Why not? You've been living in a village where the news has whiskers? Joke 3. You debate whether to sprinkle the salt or just hand it to the nearest cat as a performance bonus. When the market begins to fold canvas sighing down, trestles clacking, baskets lighten, the gossip seems to tuck itself into pockets to be unfolded later over stew pots and cards. You walk back across the green with your small packet and the faint feeling that you've purchased not protection but participation. A marmalade cat escorts you to the lane, veers off too. Inspect a pie cooling on a sill and leaves you with the courteous indifference of a colleague clocking out. Somewhere behind shutters and beside hearths, the witch-proof charms will hang with other talismans, horse skulls and rafters. Daisy wheels carved into lintels, shoes hidden in chimneys by hands that wanted luck to have a known address. And under all of it, cats will keep doing their job, watching what moves, patrolling the seams, refusing to explain themselves. The market quiets, the green exhales, and you tuck the salt away, unsure whether it wards ill or simply reassures. In this world, reassurance is already a kind of magic. Asterisk evening drapes itself over the village with the same unhurried certainty as a cat settling into a chair you were just about to use. The market's echo still lingers, faint drum beats in the soles of your feet. The ghost of cinnamon on the air, the memory of coins passing hand to hand. But now the lanes begin to change key. Doors close with the softened thud of wood that has learned the sound of its own latch. Smoke tightens its curls over the roofs, and somewhere a pot lid rattles to let out the sigh of a stew too eager for patience. You pass the alehouse, and its timber bones hum with life. The place is only 2 rooms wide, but it's the sort of building that makes an entire street lean toward it in case something worth hearing leaks out. Tonight's worth hearing if the ripple of laughter under the roof is any clue. The small diamond panes of the windows glow amber, their light freckled by the shadows of people leaning in toward each other. Step inside, ducking the low lintel, and find the air dense with roasted meat, yeast, and that indefinable scent of conversation that's been brewing all day. A table near the fire is crowded with locals, elbows and tankards claiming territory. The center of attention is an older man in a saffron tunic, sleeves rolled to show forearms that have lived outdoors. His voice carries just enough to make the room feel like one shared ear. I told her if the cat's spying for the witch, he's terrible at it. He fell in the grain sack again. The table roars. Someone pounds the wood, and a cat you hadn't noticed before, perched on a high shelf, flattens its ears with the long-suffering dignity of an unwilling celebrity. Mainstream fact. Medieval alehouses and taverns were more than watering holes. They were newsrooms, courts of opinion, hiring halls, and occasionally impromptu theaters. A traveling peddler could trade the latest town gossip for a night's board, and a returning sailor might exchange a sea story for a round. The more fantastical the tale, the more likely it was to be repeated, especially if it involved witchcraft, omens, or talking animals. You find a seat on a bench polished to silk by a century of cloaks. The bench offers exactly 3 creaks, all of which you interpret as an agreement to let you stay. A serving girl in a teal kirtle slides a mug toward you, its froth leaning like a daring acrobat. She nods toward the storyteller's table. They're onto the cattails again, she murmurs. Better than last winter's ghost on the mill roof. You sip. The ale is warm, but so is the room, and neither seems inclined to apologize. Saffron tunic man, clearly the evening's anchor, moves into another story. This one involves a black cat scene slipping into the smithy at midnight, and a hammer that began to strike on its own. He swears the sound woke half the lane. Historians still argue whether such tales began as allegories, warnings about theft, or reminders to keep watch on valuable tools, or whether people truly believed a witch's familiar could animate the forge. The man's audience clearly prefers the second explanation, judging by the gasps and delighted shivers. On the hearth, another cat ginger, with the unbothered expression of an unpaid supervisor, stretches in the heat. A boy of about 10 inches, closer to scratch its ears, and the cat allows exactly 3 strokes before delivering a look that says, "That will be sufficient." Quirky tidbit: some medieval inns kept a resident cat as both mouser and mascot, even going so far as to note the cat's existence in the inn's ledgers. In some cases, the animal owed the innkeeper a symbolic rent, usually a single mouse per week, though compliance was largely symbolic too. The talk drifts between tall tales and daily troubles. The baker's new apprentice can't tell rye from barley. The priest's sermon ran so long that 2 candles died of old age. The cooper's wife swears she heard someone muttering charms by the well. Oh, you notice how witchcraft slips into these conversations, not like a dark threat, but as seasoning just enough to make the ordinary seem part of a larger, stranger pattern. Joke 1. You imagine a medieval newsletter titled The Familiar Times, complete with classifieds like Lost, 1 cauldron, last seen hopping toward river, reward 1 ham. The saffron tunic man's latest offering, a widow in the next hamlet supposedly keeps a cat that knows the weather. According to him, if the cat sits in the doorway, son, it hides. Under the bed, rain. If it's on the roof, well, best pack a bag. The table nods at this system as if it's perfectly sensible. Mainstream fact: animals are weather predictors of a kind, responding to changes in air pressure or temperature. But filtered through a medieval lens, the behavior gains a touch of prophecy. A serving boy delivers a plate of something roasted and aromatic to the storyteller, and a small paw immediately appears at the table's edge. The man absent-mindedly offers a scrap. The cat accepts it, then sits with its back to the giver. Classic cat approval. Proof, he says, that the witch's spy is satisfied with my hospitality. The table laughs again, and you notice how the room seems to hum in agreement with itself. For tonight at least. The villagers are united in the harmless pleasure of repeating the improbable. Historians still debate how much these gatherings shaped communal memory. Was a black cat at a doorstep remembered as coincidence until repeated? Here, in the warm circle of ale and jest, where it grew its tail and whiskers into something supernatural? Or did the telling come first, and the memory bend itself to fit? Joke 2. You consider telling your own story about a cat that writes sermons, just to see if it becomes local canon by next Tuesday. As the evening thickens, the door swings open. For a final arrival, a fisherman smelling faintly of the river's cold breath. He carries a wicker creel, and inside, peering out as if taking attendance, is a black and white cat. Found her on the bank, he says simply. She followed me all the way back. The room bursts into speculation. She's the miller's. She belongs to the widow with the weather cat. She's never been seen before and thus must be magical. The fisherman shrugs, accepts ale. And the cat curls up under his bench as though she's been there forever. Joke 3. You think about slipping the cat a note asking for her hourly spy rate. You suspect she'd demand payment in roast chicken. When you finally step outside, the night folds around you with its cool, familiar weight. The moon hangs low, a coin you can almost imagine a cat pawing at from the roof of the alehouse. Somewhere in the dark, paws pad along the lane, quiet but deliberate. Walk on, aware that in this village, even the silence might be reporting back to someone. Asterisk. Dawn wrinkles the edge of the fields, that particular gray-blue that makes everything look like it's been sketched in charcoal first and colored later. Your breath hangs in front of you as you follow a footpath between hedges that still remember. Last night's frost? A rooster gives the countryside its opinion, loud, repetitive, and not subject to debate. You're headed to a farm on the village's elbow, where the barns sit a little apart like shy cousins at a feast. The gate complains as you lift the latch, and 2 things happen at once. A woman in a russet shawl leans from the farmhouse door. With a wave, and a streak of tabby fur shoots across the yard, like an arrow someone forgot to invent a bow for. That's Pip, farmer says. When you reach the yard, pointing with a pitchfork that is seen every season twice, Barnes. Safe because of her. You watch the cat reappear on a beam just under the eaves, tail like a punctuation mark, eyes scanning the world for grammar mistakes. Which sent vermin, he adds, half serious, half satisfied with the phrase. They try, but Pip's quicker. Leads you to the big doors of the granary, where the timber smells warm, even in cold light, hold hay dust, and the faint sweetness of grain that's thinking about becoming bread someday. Inside, the floor is raised on mushroom-shaped staddle stones, neat and smug, keeping the stores high above damp and climbing teeth. Mainstream fact unrolls itself without fuss. In medieval Europe, grain remained a household's bank and a village's. Winter. Barns and granaries were engineered like fortresses, with raised floors, tight doors, and the occasional cat drafted into permanent service. Where you keep your calories, you keep your guards. The farmer tosses back the hatch at the base of a bin and lets a few kernels spill into his palm. Oats, he says. Mice fancy it like a bishop's table. The tabby appears as if named, but really she's just answered to the far older language of tiny scuffling. She sniffs, looks offended on principle, and slides into a gap between. To bins with the confidence of a rumor, you hear the softest rustle, then nothing. The farmer smiles, all front teeth in relief. She'll make the rounds, he says. Up in the loft, shafts of morning sift through spaces in the thatch like patient angels. You climb the ladder, your hands taking the cold of the rungs, and peer down through gaps to the floor below. From this angle, the granary becomes a little theater. Pip crosses stage left, pauses in a spot of light, then vanishes under a heap of sacks that were the chalked promise of bushels. The farmer follows your gaze. Rats come clever when the moon's thin, he says. Witches send em to test our housekeeping. He says it with the easy contradiction of a man who feeds both theology and cats. Be vigilant. Also, believe in Pip. Quirky tidbit the farmer's wife offers as she arrives with a mug of something hot. Thank you. Her mother taught her to sprinkle a line of crushed mint along the sill on new moon nights to confuse evil noses. She presses a few leaves into your hand. You smell them green, sharp, a kitchen sermon. And we always give Pip a splash of milk first thing, she adds. A cat who starts the day thanked finishes it loyal. You decide there are worse. Management philosophies. Joke 1. You briefly consider adopting this for people: one splash of milk. Instant loyalty, but the HR paperwork seems daunting. The farmer knocks his pitchfork against the floor, and the sound tells you the wood is dry and proud of it. We had a plague of M once, he says, meaning rats, mice, something small but multiplied enough to move the ledger. After the miller took his share and the church took its 10th, we were left measuring prayer. He points to a trio of holes near a beam where someone has carved neat circles like coins, set traps, sat up nights. Then Pip came stray as Windan slept on the sacks like she meant to invoice us later. He grins. No more plague. Only occasional sermons from the priest about keeping beasts in their proper dignity. You glance at the farmer. Proper dignity? He shrugs, and there's a whole theological council in that shrug. Historians still argue whether clergy condemned cats outright or merely scolded the superstitions that clung to them. You've heard a dozen versions: black cats as diabolical assistants, cats as pagan leftovers, cats as entirely fine provided they ate mice and not metaphors. In practice, the village prays one day and thanks Pip the next. Everyone survives the paradox. On a peg near the door hangs a small bundle of dried herbs. Tied with red thread, you'd bet 3 onions it came from yesterday's charmonger. For luck, the farmer's wife says before you can ask. And because it smells nicer than mice. Nice. She laughs at herself, then grows thoughtful. My grandmother used to say, a cat sleeping backs to the door means the house is safe. She nods toward Pip, who has indeed materialized atop the sacks, curled in a crescent with her spine presented to the room as if covering it with an invisible cloak. Outside, the barnyard rubs its eyes. Chickens debrief themselves about the night. A dog yawns like a door hinge, reconsidering its life choices. Pip lifts her head and gives the dog a look that would freeze soup. The dog sighs and chooses neutrality. You feel promoted to spectator. With limited voting rights, the farmer sets a wooden measure, peck on the floor, and drives home a wedge to keep a bin steady. We mark every sack, he says. Count each bucket. You run a finger over the chalk. Tidy tallies. No nonsense. If we lose grain, we lose sleep, he adds. When a man can't sleep, he starts spinning reasons. He means witches. Neighbors who borrow and forget to return the moon. He means the comfortable stories that arrive before the harder work of mending floors and plugging holes. Pip, uninterested in narratives, washes a paw with the gravity of a notary. Quirky tidbit number 2. Offered as a story the farmer swears is just a story. when his father rebuilt the small east barn? The thatcher found a dried cat in the wall, old as the first prayer said over this field. Kept the mischief out, the thatcher muttered, sliding the mummified guardian back where he found it before patching over the gap. You feel a little shiver, not fear, exactly, but the hush of standing close to someone else's logic. People tuck luck into walls the way others tuck letters into books. It's not pretty, but it's human. The farmer scratches Pip between the ears to balance the scales. Joke 2. You decide if anyone tries to wall you up for luck, you'll insist on a plaque and visiting hours. Mainstream fact wanders back in, unruffled. Households across medieval Europe teeth barns, manor granaries, humble sheds relied on cats for rodent control. Ship's logs note cats as crew. Abbey kitchens kept Mausers as pious as any bell. Even accounts that cast cats as suspicious nearly always concede their usefulness. Whatever the sermon, the pantry must stay full. Pip drops from her perch with a sound like a bookmark closing. She pads to a crack between two planks, sets herself as elegantly as a bishop at council, and waits. You hold your breath without meaning. 2. A whisker twitch of movement, a blur, and then a small, tidy silence. Pip trots away with her prize tucked under privacy and returns a moment later to sit in a patch of light, paws arranged, gaze neutral, treasures report, balanced. The farmer says to no one in particular. You nod solemnly. Farmer's wife offers you a slice of brown bread damp with butter, and the barn's cold begins to reconsider. You chew and listen to the rest of the farm assemble itself. A child's shout from the yard. A bucket's thin complaint, the dog. Deciding to forgive everyone for everything? We hang salt by the door, she says, noticing your glance at a little linen pouch nailed near the latch. If witches send the small ones, she means mice. The salt sends them home thirsty. She smiles, ashamed of the logic and content with it anyway. The pouch rustles when the wind tests the seam. A question taps at your mind, so you ask it. Do they truly think witches dispatch vermin like little gray letters, or is that just a way to make sense of lean years? The farmer leans on his fork. Listen, he says. Sometimes a rat is a rat. Sometimes the season's wrong, or the millstones need truing. But if saying witch scent makes a man set to traps and check the door twice, then the cat gets her mouse either way. He's not wrong. And if Pip is a spy, he adds, she spies for us. Joke 3. You look at Pip, who is presently examining a knot in the floor with doctoral intensity, and decide her espionage reports are mostly about wood grain and the scandalous laziness of sunbeams. You help the farmer carry 2 sacks across the yard to the smaller barn, feet finding the good boards by instinct now. Pip escorts you halfway, then peels off to investigate a corner where straw has made ambitious life choices. At the threshold, the farmer pauses to touch a chalk mark on the stone, a simple circle with a line through it. For turning away. Harm, he says. For reminding ourselves to latch the door. Perhaps both, you think. Symbols do fine work when teamed with good habits. By the time you step back into the lane, the sun has climbed enough to give the hedges gold edges. Pip is on the roof ridge now, a small figure with a big sky, tail curled like a question mark that doesn't need answering. You raise a hand in salute. She does not return the gesture because decorum forbids it. But she blinks once, the slow blink that cats offer when they recognize you as harmless furniture that occasionally brings snacks. Grain clinks softly behind barn walls. Farm exhales. For all the talk of witch scent vermin, you think the truest spell here is the combination of a raised floor, a watched door, in one tabby with a full inbox and 4 excellent paws? Asterisk, the road from the farm to the church curves like it's trying. Not to be seen, skirting the hedgerows and dodging little dips in the land where mist still lingers. Your boots take the damp with a kind of resigned gratitude. You've been colder, wetter, and less entertained. A bell somewhere ahead tolls. The hour, though here the hour is more about summoning people than marking time for them. You're headed toward a low cluster of stone buildings, the church sitting slightly apart like a watchful parent at a marketplace. You can smell bread before you see the Avena side project of the church kitchen. The scent is warm, malty, touched. With the faint edge of wood ash, boy with ears that could catch rain if they tried, is shooing pigeons from the steps. He glances at you, then at something behind you and mutters, "Mind the black one." You turn in time to see a sleek, cold-dark cat slide out from between two gravestones, tail riding the air like a banner in slow motion. She makes no sound inside. The church's nave is chill and smells of stone beeswax, the faint tang of something herbal, likely rosemary, which the sacristan swears keeps moths from the vestments. A few parishioners are kneeling, murmuring prayers to saints who have seen more barn roofs than most bishops. The priest, a man with a brow permanently arranged for both blessing and disapproval, is near the altar arranging candles. The black cat follows you in, padding up the aisle with the casual confidence of someone who knows every creak of the floor. Mainstream fact slips into place. Cats were often kept in churches. Not for theological purposes, but for practical ones. Grain tied to the parish had to be stored somewhere, and with grain came rodents. Even holy water fonts weren't safe. From the occasional floating mouse, church's black mouser, you suspect, is here on both business and interpretive service. She hops onto a pew and regards you with the gold eyes of someone measuring your worth against the available sunlight. The priest notices her, frowns, and mutters something under his breath. "We keep her for the stores," he says when you ask, "but you'll hear the old women say she belongs to less reputable company." He means witches. He doesn't have to say it. You're told the story later by a churchwarden with a fondness for ale. Once, during a particularly lean winter, a cat not unlike this one appeared in the nave every Sunday, sitting just inside the door. No one claimed her, yet she stayed. And the mouse problem that had been gnawing the parish's tithe vanished, as if swept away. The villagers whispered that the cat was a familiar sent by a local witch to protect the grain in exchange for some secret pact. Joke 1. You decide this sounds less like diabolical magic and more like the world's slowest but most committed delivery service. Quirky tidbit emerges from the warden's tale every year since then. Someone leaves a small saucer of cream under the lectern on Michaelmas morning. No one admits to it, but the cat, whether the same or a long succession of lookalikes, always arrives in time to lap it up. Historians still argue whether these customs are remnants of pre-Christian animal veneration, harmless superstition, or simply the stubborn refusal of rural communities to let go of a good story. The black cat disappears for a moment, and you find her again in the side chapel, curled under the carved wood of a confessional. A strip of sunlight has found her ear, making it glow like a small ruby. Crouched down, and she opens one eye, then closes it again, deciding you are not important enough to disturb her nap schedule. Joke 2. You silently rank yourself below mice, sunlight, and possibly the squeak of the sacristan's shoe. A monk in a patched brown robe enters, carrying a small sack. He notices your interest and empties the sack onto the floor. Dried herbs and what look like tiny bones. "For the churchyard," he says, "keeps the burrowing ones from troubling the graves." You nod, and he adds, "and for her." The cat stirs, stretches, and accepts a few of the dried herbs as if they are treats, rubbing her cheek against them before resuming her post. The monk shares a piece of local folklore. A black cat crossing your path is unlucky unless you greet it by name. Trouble is, no one ever names the church cat aloud. The name is hers alone. That way, if she truly is a witch's spy, she can't be summoned away. You glance at her again, now grooming her paw in slow, deliberate strokes, and suspect she knows more about theology than half the congregation. Mainstream fact again nudges in: the medieval church, while sometimes condemning cats in general sermons against superstition, often tolerated them in practice. Records show monasteries listing cats among their assets, valued for their mouse-catching ability, not their spiritual symbolism. Yet sermons warning against the devil's creatures could be preached from pulpits, where those very creatures slept on the rafters. Contradictions lived comfortably under that roof. It's much like the cat herself. The black cat eventually rises and pads toward a side door, which opens onto a narrow garden hemmed by the churchyard wall. Rosemary bushes stand like green sentinels, and there's a bench under a yew tree whose trunk is wider than your embrace. The cat leaps onto the bench, settles, and begins her silent watch over the graves. You sit at the far end, careful not to intrude, and listen to the gentle creak of branches overhead. Quirky tidbit number 2. The gravedigger once swore that the cat scratched at a particular patch of earth, leading him to discover that a coffin lid had rotted through and let in vermin. Took it as a sign divine, or otherwise, that the cat was keeping not just the living granary safe, but the dead's rest unbroken. Since then, she's been allowed to roam the yard freely. Even during services, the priest emerges, passing by with a nod, and drops a crust of bread near the bench. The cat doesn't move, but you know she'll eat it later. He glances at you. We keep the Lord's house in order, he says. If that means feeding a shadow, so be it. Joke 3. You decide feeding a shadow would make a fine motto for your own kitchen, though it would puzzle the neighbors. As the bell tolls again, you rise, leaving the black cat to her vigil. She doesn't look at you, which somehow feels like a compliment. Outside the churchyard gate, the lane stretches back toward the village, and you imagine her still there, hours from now, a dark punctuation mark in the quiet grammar of the place. Witches, spy, mouser, or simply a creature with excellent timing, she holds the mystery the way a good story holds sleep, gently, without forcing an ending. The lane out of the churchyard curls past the last of the cottages like it's reluctant to leave company, then eases you into the open fields where the grass lies flat from recent rain. You walk slowly now, not because you're tired, but because the air has taken on that heavy, mossy smell that makes each step feel like it's tamped into memory. Somewhere ahead, a low hill rises with a half-forgotten track along its spine, and you're told there's an old barn there, one that's had more stories than grain inside. At these last few decades, you find it just as the sky folds into the muted blues and grays of approaching evening. The barn leans a little, its timber weathered to the color of stale bread crust, and one door hangs partly open. You duck inside, eyes adjusting to the dimness that smells faintly of hay, dust, and the metallic temps of rain dripping through the roof, and there perched high on the crossbeams another cat. This one a mottled tortoiseshell with a patch of white over her left eye, giving her the appearance of a one-eyed sea captain. She regards you with the slow blink of someone who has absolutely no stake in your arrival. You've learned by now this is the cat equivalent of a shrug. Mainstream fact drifts in. Barns were prime real estate for cats in the medieval world, both for the food supply read, endless mice, and for the warmth that haylofts offered in winter. Many farmers encouraged cats to take up residence even when they swore otherwise at the church about keeping away the devil's spies. It was one of those tidy hypocrisies that kept the world running. The tortoiseshell hops down with surprising grace, landing silently on the packed earth floor. Her ears twitch toward the sound of something rustling in the hay. Without even glancing at you, she slinks forward, tail twitching in that slow metronome of feline intent. She disappears, and a moment later, there's a faint squeak, and then silence. Joke 1. You briefly consider offering applause, but suspect the review would be lost on her A. Farmer Boots caked with half the field enters, carrying a lantern. He spots you, nods, and then sees the cat carrying her prize. The witch's quartermaster, he says, not unkindly. You raise an eyebrow, and he explains, if she belongs to a witch, she's making sure the pantry stays full for winter. If she belongs to me, she's doing the same. Doesn't much matter which. Quirky tidbit emerges. Here this farmer swears that the tortoiseshell only hunts on nights when the moon is more than half full. He's been keeping tally marks on the barn wall, and while the pattern could be coincidence, he's convinced it's lunar orders from her mistress. Historians still argue whether such beliefs were simply a way to explain odd animal behavior, or if people genuinely saw them as part of an unseen, magical economy. You lean against a post as the cat finishes her work, dropping the mouse in the doorway and sitting beside it, clearly expecting someone else to handle the cleanup. The farmer obliges with a shovel, muttering something about paying rent and mice. The lantern casts long, jittery shadows on the barn walls, and for a moment the cat's own shape looks stretched and tall, her head cocked as if she's listening to something you can't hear. The farmer mentions, almost as an afterthought, That the barn sits on land where a cunning woman once lived generations ago? Healer with a reputation for knowing both plants and secrets. She vanished one autumn, leaving only her cat behind. Folks say that's why the barn's been lucky ever since. Why storms split and pass on either side. Why the grain never molders before it's milled. Joke 2. You consider asking if the cat can also prevent laundry from shrinking, but decide against it. As the light fades, the tortoiseshell leaps back up onto her crossbeam perch, tail curled around her paws like she's sealing herself in for the night. The farmer takes his leave, lanterns swinging, and you find yourself alone except for the cat and the creak of the old wood. You can feel the cool air pressing in through the gaps, carrying the scent of damp earth and wood smoke from some distant hearth. Mainstream fact again slips in. Not all cats were feared sailors in particular, prized them for keeping ships free of vermin. But on land, especially in rural areas with tight-knit communities, a strange cat appearing on your property could be enough to stir whispers of witchcraft. Those whispers, once started, were hard to silence, and often stuck to the animal for life. The tortoiseshell curls tighter, eyes slitting shut. You stand for a while longer, letting the quiet settle in layers. First, the absence of human voices, then the absence of bird calls, then the deeper, almost physical silence of a building. That's more shadow than structure. Joke 3. You start to wonder if the cat's job is less about catching mice and more about keeping humans from leaving too quickly. Eventually, you step out into the cooling air. The moon is indeed just past half full tonight, pale and slightly blurred behind a thin veil of clouds. You glance back once to see the barn's open door like a square of darkness, the faint outline of the cat visible above it. She's watching, though whether it's you or the field beyond, you can't tell. The path leads downhill toward the road, and you take it slowly, letting your mind wander over all the feline encounters of the day. Black cats in churchyards, tortoiseshells in barns, each with their own myths, habits, and small acts of mischief wrapped in fur. Witches, spies? Maybe. Or maybe just survivors with a knack for choosing the coziest corners of human life. Either way, they've threaded themselves into the story so tightly, you can't pull them out without. It's unraveling the whole thing. And that, you think, is the real magic. Not curses or pacts, but persistence. The kind that keeps a cat on the beam of an old barn year after year, long after her supposed mistress is just another name in the parish ledger. Word count? 1080. Wind down 300 words, you take the long way back, following the road until it slips into the hush of night. The fields on either side are dark now, only their outlines catching the silver trace of the moon. Your steps slow, partly from the soft drag of tired legs, partly from that reluctance to let go of the day's odd, quiet company. A light breeze moves through the hedgerows, carrying with it the scent of wood smoke and something faintly sweet, perhaps hay, perhaps just the memory of summer. The sound is low and steady, a background hum that blurs the edge between waking and drifting. Somewhere far off, a night bird calls once and then falls silent again, leaving you in the kind of calm that feels older than the road itself. You picture the black cat still keeping her post in the churchyard garden. High in the barn rafters, their eyes half closed but always alert. In that way, cats never quite surrender to sleep. They are sentinels of a sort, watching over spaces that don't truly belong to anyone anymore. Except in memory. Your own thoughts begin to soften at the edges, curling inward like the tail of a sleeping cat. The details blur, not gone, just gentled on till all that remains is the steady rhythm of your breath and the faint trace of moonlight on the path ahead. And with that, you let the last of the day settle over you, as easy and untroubled as a cat finding the warmest place in the house.